One of the nice things that's been added to SharePoint Declarative Workflows is the notion of a reusable workflow. Let me show you how we make use of this. Reusable workflows are just as easy to edit and design as standard workflows that are normally bound to a list or a library. Let me go ahead and open this up. And it looks identical to the workflow environment for doing a standard list or library-based workflow. You still have the ability to zoom in and zoom out. All the tools that are there before are still here. What's different about it? It's a reusable workflow, meaning that we save it in one place. It's scoped specifically to a site, and then you can associate it with, just like you could a code-based workflow authored in Visual Studio, you associate it with a list or a library or a content type, which is extremely handy. In fact, you can even define association columns, which look a lot like start data or variables, except they're not localized variables. They're declarations of the columns the workflow needs. And so when you create them, you basically are saying something to the effect of, I'm going to need a number called total. And if it's present in the content type or the list or library that this gets associated with, great, bind it. If, however, it's not present, then you're going to need to create it. Extremely handy, extremely powerful. It lets you design a workflow that makes certain assumptions, and it ensures that those assumptions are going to pan out. Now that's one new type of workflow. There's another new type of workflow, which is known as a site workflow. And again, we make these extremely easy to design. A site workflow is essentially a workflow that is not particularly bound to any kind of SharePoint content. I mean, we can certainly do list and library workflows that are tied to specific pieces of SharePoint content, and those can also be bound to what are now called document sets. In other words, a whole grouping of SharePoint content that gets acted on, secured, and workflowed as if it were one logical unit of work. But a site workflow is different. A site workflow exists independently of any specific content. It's scoped to the site, and for those of you like we who believe SharePoint is the center of the universe and you want to use that as your workflow environment, well, this will allow you to create a workflow that doesn't depend on a list item, that can reach out and touch a lot of different pieces of software in a lot of different places, or can run through a whole bunch of content living inside of SharePoint itself, but treat it like a whole set of content or collection of content as opposed to one item at a time. So site workflows are great. In this particular example, we run a query across the content in a SharePoint site to get a list of new documents. We iterate through that collection and build up a rich text message that contains the URLs and titles of all the new content discovered over a period of time, and then we email what we find to the members of the site. It's not an especially complex workflow here, but it does begin to give you an idea of the kinds of things you're going to be able to accomplish. And then, on top of all of that, there are some more advantages that have come with the new SharePoint workflow platform. In addition to everything that's been done with site workflows, in addition to everything that's been done with reusable workflows and such, one nice thing that's happened is that you can now bind an info path form to a list item, which effectively means not only can you create very, very nice user interfaces for lists, but it also means you can create very, very nice info path forms that get bound to, shall we say, workflow tasks. So you can create custom workflow tasks, and we have full support for both ASP.NET forms and full support for using info path forms, not just for activation forms and association forms, but absolutely for workflow items themselves and for the actual data involved. And we'll talk a whole lot more about that in greater detail in the months to come.